Step into an exciting, colorful, wonderfully new world as Walt Disney brings to glowing life the adventures of Alice in Wonderland, based on Lewis Carroll's beloved story. There are wonderful tunes for your heart, wonderful thrills for your eyes as you share with Alice the wonderful things she sees, the wonderful friends she meets. Tweedledum and Tweedledee, the Walrus and the Carpenter, the Mad Hatter, the March Hare, the Cheshire Cat, the White Rabbit, and many more.
Hello and welcome to episode 21 of We'll Review It Our Shelves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks we'll take a randomly selected movie from our collection and we'll review it ourselves. I'm Brian Morgan, and...
with you as always from Los Angeles is Daniel Bergman.
Okay, so episode 21, we're going to be discussing Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, our podcast is legal now.
I would take it out to drink if I could. But before we get into our Alice in Wonderland conversation, let's go to our listener feedback. And we have received some. We got a little bit of listener feedback from the National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation episode, the watch along. And that is from username BTR on the Podbean page. And that happens to be a guy I know. So I know his actual name. I'm not going to put it out there because that's the way the Podbean works. So we'll use his listener name. But he said, I watch this movie every year religiously. And he also contacted me personally via Facebook and let me know that he is enjoying the podcast. So thank you very much, and we hope you share it and continue to listen. And from our Mimic episode, we received from listener feedback from one of our staunch listeners, Jeff Edwards, who has commented on a few of our Facebook posts. He said, great episode. When you were talking about how Mira Sorvino's career more or less peaked with this movie, I'm surprised that you didn't go into how she was blacklisted by Harvey Weinstein. Peter Jackson confirmed that he didn't cast her, and Ashley Judd, in Lord of the Rings because Weinstein's company, Miramax, told him they were a nightmare to work with and we should avoid them at all costs. Other directors have since come forward confirming the Weinstein-Miramax smear campaign against Sorvino, Judd, and other women who declined sexual advances from HW. Now, Dan commented on the website, so we're not necessarily going to read that here because you can go to the Facebook page and check that out. But Jeff also added a link to a Variety.com article that confirms what he was saying. Not like we didn't trust him, but it was just to show that so that we could do a little bit of research. So what I kind of wanted to do, Dan, is address this as a thing that we didn't know about and kind of pick up the discussion as if we did, if you catch what I'm saying, if you catch the nuance there. So now that you know this, how does that change your take on what we discussed during the Mimic episode?
Obviously, it's when you find out about something like this, it's to use the cliches, it's shocking and appalling. You know, it's true what they say. You know, ignorance was bliss. It's just, you know, it turned. Well, I wonder what happened to her into. Oh man, that's horrible. And it just it really makes it difficult to enjoy movies now, knowing that these things occur. You know, it's like to know that she didn't get a part in a certain movie because she was blacklisted. It's like, can I really enjoy that movie? And it does make our hobby, our interests, and our passions very difficult.
I agree a little bit. It does take into the equation that we now have to think about the person or persons behind the movie. Again, there's a part of me that does want to have that blissful ignorance of not knowing some of the stuff that has occurred. But by the same token, you can look at the art and still see the art without necessarily taking into account who was involved in producing that art. Maybe that's a cop-out, but I'm not going to stop going to movies because I know that this stuff happens because it happens all over the place. And I think we had discussed this before off mic about this affects every industry. It's not just the Hollywood film industry. They just happen to have the most visible of platforms to discuss their issues. Part of the reason that they're discussing those issues is because it does affect everyone else. So they want to have that conversation, and I totally respect that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. It's like that wasn't for me to say that I'm going to stop watching movies, because obviously there are a lot of movies that are made without the what's the word I'm looking for? Without the scandal, without the misconduct and the criminal behavior. Like I said, though, it does make it difficult, because I have that in the back of my head now. It's like, what did this person have to do to get this role? Because I mean, I'm sure you've seen in a lot of movies where it's just like, how the hell did this person get this role? You never expected so, and now you have to think, was there some sort of nefarious, dealings? Did the person have to sell their soul to be famous, so to say? It makes it difficult. It won't make me stop appreciating movies, and I'll still like the art. There's just certain things that, yeah, this movie was great, even though the director was a complete bastard for whatever reason.
Sure, and the code that they used was, they're a nightmare to work with, or they're difficult to deal with, and that sort of thing, kind of like what you were talking about. There are some people that are genuinely difficult to deal with.
Yeah, I have heard that Tom Cruise is a monster to work with, but that's the thing. He's got this notorious reputation from people that he's difficult to work with, but the man is still working.
It's true. It's true. He's got a lot of backing from people that are tied into the Scientology, I'm sure. I mean, there's a lot of different things in play. But to go back to your point, he's still working. Now, there's plenty of movies that I've seen Tom Cruise in. I'm like, cool. And there are some that are like, ugh. So, I don't think that this is slightly down a different rabbit hole, to borrow a phrase from the movie we're going to discuss later. But I don't think that Tom Cruise is quite the box office draw that he used to be. But that's neither here nor there. On the flip side, about kind of going back to what you were talking about did someone have to sell their soul? This is, with Harvey Weinstein in particular, this has been going on for decades. And part of me is a little surprised that people are shocked that this sort of thing happens, because it does happen in the real world. But I'm also a little shocked because there are movies that are actually made about this sort of thing. And there are parts of movies that speak to that sort of thing. So it's not shocking that art was imitating life, or that life is imitating art. But going back to your original statement, that people are still doing it is shocking and appalling.
There's part of that people are surprised it still goes on, but there's the other part, and I think this plays the major role in the public eye, and I think when it comes to any kind of sexual misconduct or harassment, is denial. The public doesn't seem to want to look at something like this in the face and say, yeah, we accept it and we ought to do something. A lot of the reaction we get is, well, why are they just now bringing this up? Why didn't they take care of it then? Yeah, obviously you don't know the dynamics of such a relationship, and the amount of fear and coercion that goes into it, and then the embarrassment. I mean, if you're reacting to this now, something that happened years ago, what if they came up to you right now? And I've seen this, where they say, hey, so-and-so did this to me, and say, oh, really? What were you wearing? What did you do to provoke it? But, and that's why people don't mention these things as they happen, and that's why these things go on for a long time. Now, add to the equation, you have somebody of power and influence who can make your life miserable. To me, that's a no-brainer, why it wasn't brought up then.
Sure, absolutely.
So this whole public collective denial, I think, is why we have what we have today.
What I find interesting about the why did they wait so long is that people will dismiss it out of hand as, well, I didn't hear about it. Like, well, who are you? Why is this any of your business? They may have entrusted this to a close friend and confidant and gotten the, oh, well, what were you wearing? Or don't say anything because, he's a powerful man and he can ruin you. You want to work in this city. And they said, oh, well, you know what? Let me just suppress this. Let me just push this down into a deep, dark little pocket and never pull it out again. And when you do that, it festers and it eats at you until 20, 30 years later, you're suddenly finding the strength and the strength through others who have experienced the same thing, which is why you see one person come out and then others say, yeah, hashtag me too, because it affected a lot more people. So when you're suffering in silence, you're not going to say anything, but when you find that you have others who have experienced similar things, you're more willing to share openly.
Yeah, that's why I think that was the whole thing. I mean, to expand this kind of issue of, keeping people silent and everything. I mean, I think that's where, being in the closet was such a common phrase, because if you just let somebody believe that they are alone, that you're a freak and there's no one else like you and everything, yeah, you stay silent, you stay quiet, and nobody else has to deal with it. But when people started coming out for whatever reason, whether it be who they are or what happened to them and everything like that, then when one person sees it, hey, that person's out, I'm coming out, and it's just like you see in movies where everybody comes out of the huts, or the Munchkins come out, or whatever, because it's like, oh well, we're still weary, but we have a little less to be afraid of. Let's all come out in strength now. Like you said, it's a very empowering thing to feel that you are not alone.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, I think that's probably one of the most powerful things that you can ever learn about anything in your life, is that you are not alone.
And that's part of the reason why I post some of the things that I post in certain areas on Facebook, because I know that there are people who think similar to me, not necessarily the same, but sometimes because there are so many voices that are saying, hey, you're wrong, that occasionally we have to remember that you're not wrong, or we have to show other people that it's okay to confront that, because there is strength in unity. And to go back to the time thing, and to show the other organizations that this sort of thing takes place in, let's look at all of the allegations of child sexual abuse with the Catholic Church. You have young men who come out 20, 30 years later and accuse the priest of touching them inappropriately or other things, and I don't want to go into details, just that this exists, but they are believed. At least that's my interpretation. But when it's from a woman, it's generally not as believed. So there is a dynamic in play that shows that gender disparity between victims and victimhood, and who gets believed and who doesn't. Is it just me? I mean, have you seen that?
Oh yes, I see that all too often. And the worst part of that is, like, you see that happen. Again, it goes to it's like, well, what did you do? What were you wearing? Well, you were pretty provocative and everything. You get a lot of that. The worst part of that, though, is a lot of that comes from other women too. And that, to me, that is a kind of betrayal that I could never fully understand, because I'm not a woman. But from my point of view, it's pretty terrible. So I can maybe guess how bad it is for a woman who thinks that they can get support from somebody who they think would understand, but doesn't. And yeah, that's a kind of feeling I wouldn't wish on anyone.
Yeah, same here, which goes back to the original point, or not quite the original point, but one of the points that you had made earlier, or rather I had made earlier, about confiding in someone and being summarily dismissed. I do want to take 1 minute to talk about a meme that has been circulating around the internet that shows some women on the red carpet for the Golden Globes when they were doing the dress in black as a show of solidarity for the hashtag #MeToo movement. And the meme basically refers to Grandma's old story about, if you don't want anyone touching your critters, don't make it look like a petting zoo. And it shows the women in their sexy dresses. I mean, they're slightly revealing, some midriff showing and that sort of thing. And somebody posted it, and I pushed back on it, because it goes back to that same concept that you were talking about expecting support from women and not getting it. And one of the other things that I pushed back on was your point about, what were you wearing? Well, who gives a crap? None of that gives anyone license to touch anyone. My personal opinion is, if you dress in a way that draws the eye, you can't be offended when the eye is drawn. But in no way, shape, or form does that ever give anyone license to be, one, an asshole, and two, touch you or accost you in any way, shape, or form. Again, looking is what you're looking for, to be redundant. It doesn't mean you have to be an asshole about it.
Yeah, whenever I see stuff like that, I always like to throw the counter analogy. It's like, hey, this guy got mugged. Oh, really? What were you wearing? A suit and a tie? Oh, so you're dressed pretty nicely, huh? So you look like you had money. But he robbed me. And I'm like, yeah, but, don't you think you were probably asking for it?
Yeah, you were.
Yeah, looking at stuff, it said you were wearing a nice watch, a gold necklace, and everything, and look at the car you drive. You were asking for it, buddy. But that doesn't exist. But imagine if it did.
I think we would look at things a lot differently, and quite frankly, the whole thing, as you said, is appalling. The double standard, the ridiculousness of justifying any sort of behavior where a person in power can use, in this case specifically sex, as a means of controlling another human. I mean, man or woman, it's irrelevant, because there are cases where there are men that are sexually harassing young boys, in the case of Kevin Spacey. But insofar as this goes, with Mira Sorvino specifically, because we talked about her in the Mimic episode, being blacklisted, this man took her livelihood, her passion, because as we discussed in the previous podcast, she was Harvard educated, had her degree in Chinese. She didn't have to go into acting. She could have done other things. But this was her passion. This is what she wanted to do. And to take that passion and pervert it into something that almost makes you hate it is, disgusting. I can't say enough bad things about it, and I really would like to discuss this at great length, because I could spend hours just discussing how horrible it is. But at the end of the day, I think that Harvey Weinstein deserves to be in jail for his behavior. I don't know what the statute of limitations is, so I don't know how that applies. I think that anyone who does that sort of thing deserves to be in jail, and it's utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same boat there. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that I have a adequate enough vocabulary to properly articulate how I feel about things like this that happen. Again, as the person that I am, I mean, in a broad sense that, I am a man, and I will never be able to fully understand the feelings felt. I just know that it hurts people that I know of and people that I know personally, and I don't like that. I don't like when people I know are hurt. That hurts me. If someone like that, justice must be served, or else more and more people will suffer, and it just, yeah, it needs to end.
I agree. Yeah, I think what you said sums it up pretty well. I mean, it needs to end. Was there anything else that you kind of wanted to talk about?
Well, it's to really kind of stick with, this is happening in Hollywood, this is what's in the spotlight. I think it's also important to note that this is just in the spotlight. And as we know, the spotlight is a very thin, finite part of what we actually see. And there's a lot more of the stage that we don't see. This is the kind of thing that happens to young Susan that works fries at McDonald's. And even less people care about what happens to her because she's just a fast food worker. She's a minimum wage earner. Who cares? The thing we forget is, like, yeah, she's a human being who deserves dignity, and that we should care. And I think that's why it's important, like you said, with Hollywood being the most in the spotlight, the most vocal, the most out there, making it easier for everyone else, for young Susan on fries at McDonald's, to say, hey, me too. I think it's probably the only time where trickle down actually works.
Sorry, that was funny. Yeah, I agree. It goes back to supporting what I think you had said, and actually what we both agreed on was, there's strength in numbers, and the more people that can say, hey, it happened to me too, which again is why the hashtag #MeToo is appropriate. One of the other things that I wanted to discuss is the discounting of the stories of women who have been harassed because one little fact doesn't line up. Also, when a group of women come out to accuse one individual, when you find that one woman that embellished the story or simply made it up in the first place. Because once that happens, it discounts the stories of all of them.
Yeah.
And it's sad, but it's true.
That is one of the things that really because I see it so often on social media / Facebook, where it's like that somebody will post one story about how one person, made up the rape allegations and, yeah, it ruined somebody's life and it happened. That's one time. And yes, that person ought to be punished because in a case where, yes, this person didn't ruin your life, you end up ruining that person's life. To me, that makes it no less wrong. But then they turn around and go, it's like, well, I guess this means we can't trust anybody. And it's so frustrating. It's like, no, that's not what it means. It's like these are the same people who are so quick to defend corrupt police officers and say, you can't judge all police officers based on this one incident, but apparently we can judge all women based on that one incident.
The irony is not lost.
It's infuriating to see that.
Yeah, and the other part of it is it belies the idea that 99.999% of the other women are telling the truth. And to use your analogy, 99.9999% of police officers are doing a good job or doing what they're supposed to be. But there's that one or that two that give the entire rest of them a bad name. It's frustrating because we, as a society, are so wrapped up in the moment and wrapped up in our own judgment of what did or did not happen based on incomplete reports and hearsay and what we read in the tabloids in particular for the subject at hand, which is women in film and being sexually harassed, that we forget to apply the lessons of our own life where just because someone did a thing one time or just because one person did a thing one time, we don't judge everyone by that mold.
So I agree with you to some extent, but I think there's this whole cult of status quo of, this is the way it's always been, you should just deal with it. Men have always had the advantage of being able to act like assholes in the workplace, and women didn't complain about it because you shouldn't complain about it. It's the same with the cult of the Blue Lives Matter type of thing. Hey, policemen have always been respected, so we should never, ever question their integrity. You go against any of that, and you make waves, and you cause problems. And that's why these movements are met with such backlash, in my opinion, because you're going against that status quo, the way it's always been.
I agree to a point, and I'm going to qualify my agreement slightly by saying there are people on both sides of that argument that absolutely refuse to hear anything, and it goes back to something that we've said numerous times before. There are always going to be people who are going to disagree regardless of how loudly you yell. Those are the ones that you immediately discount in general. It is approaching the large middle group of people that will appreciate the message that is being delivered, that are sadly, silently having their minds changed and are not being as vocal as one might hope. Because it's like a bell curve. You've got the extremes on both ends that are trying to shout the other side down, and it's the people in the middle that are actually going to make the difference. So, like I said, I agree, but I qualify my agreement slightly with that statement. But before we go any further down this rabbit hole, Again, I think we have slightly gotten off topic. So before we go down the rabbit hole too much farther, I just want to kind of sum up this to say I didn't know Mira Sorvino had been blacklisted, and quite frankly, the fact that that occurs appalls me. I hope that the hashtag #MeToo movement gets the attention that it deserves and makes the changes necessary not only in Hollywood, but in industry, in workplaces as a whole. Because it's one thing to innocently flirt with a coworker, as long as, again, it's mutual, and when you're told to stop, it stops. And quite another thing to sexually harass and sexually assault and use your position of authority as a bargaining chip to destroy someone. It happens everywhere, and it's I can't say enough appalling things.
No, I really can't add to that. Other than that, if you noticed in our Mimic episode, when we said, it's like, I wonder what happened to Mira Sorvino. That's truly a sad thing. I think you've brought it up before off mic. Some actors and actresses, they leave the industry for personal reasons. Rick Moranis went to take care of his family. It's just people decide, hey, I did my thing and I'm going to stop doing this because I don't want to do it anymore. But for someone like Mira Sorvino and Ashley Judd and Rose McGowan, it's just all these people who you think, wow, they could have done great things. I was really enjoying what they did make. I would have liked to have seen more. And if they were willing to give more, they should have been able to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now we, as movie-going movie enthusiasts and we as a society in a more deeper sense are much less because of it.
Yeah, because we didn't get the art that someone could have produced. So, all right, cool. Well, did you have anything else you wanted to discuss in regards to our listener feedback to Jeff?
No, I think we pretty much covered it.
Okay. All right, so this closes out our listener feedback section. A little bit longer this time.
Yeah, I think you really tapped into something deep. So before we move on, I just got one little shout out I want to give. This past weekend, actually it was 2 weekends ago or whatever, I just bought season 1 of Stranger Things. And, this is a podcast that talks about movies on our shelf. And one of the reasons is not just because of the movies, but because of the DVDs, the packaging, and the editions. And the reason I want to give a shout out, because I just think this edition is just so freaking cool. It's in the shape of a VHS package, or the packaging of a VHS tape.
Yeah, I'd seen that on the shelf at Target.
Yeah.
Or Walmart or somewhere, I forget.
No, I got it at Target, and the packaging, it says VHS on the side, everything that you would expect if this thing came in VHS form. You pull it out, it's got a little inner box that's shaped like a VHS cassette. Open it up, you got your 4 discs. I just thought it was the coolest thing. Really bring me back, because I grew up in the 80s.
As did I.
Yes, a deep appreciation for 80s culture, and, we like Stranger Things, and like I said, I just want to say, hey, if you have a chance, check out this edition. If you're a collector, you definitely need this.
Oh, I will definitely look it up. I don't usually get television series on DVD, but like I said, I have seen the package, and I do think it's pretty cool, so I might just pick that up.
It's pretty high quality. I think they really did. This is an A+ on the marketing department there.
Cool. All right. And on to 1951, Disney's Alice in Wonderland. An animated retelling of Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass.
Yeah, I gotta say, the description of this one is that this is definitely a Disneyfication of Lewis Carroll's Acid Trip.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head. This movie is Lewis Carroll on acid. And it was an acid trip in the 50s before acid trips were cool. Maybe it was mushrooms or something that occurs in nature.
I don't know that. I don't know if they had hallucinogenic.
Well, was it the peyote is a hallucinogenic, isn't it? That's natural.
Okay.
So I'm sure some existed in the 50s, and government experimentation notwithstanding. So one of the things that I actually wanted to talk about this movie was its linguistic connections, and we kind of pointed it out a couple of times during our listener comments about asking how far down the rabbit hole did we want to go. But there are other things from this movie that we say almost offhandedly without necessarily knowing exactly where they came from. And I think the credit goes to Disney and this movie for putting that into the cultural lexicon, because there are not that many people that quote books. I know I do. I have some favorite books, and I will occasionally quote the book, and that it's something that's never been made into a movie. So most times people are like, "What are you talking about?" But how far down the rabbit hole does this go, and its use in other films? And people have been wont to say "Mad as a March Hare," or "He sat there grinning like a Cheshire cat." Have you seen that incorporated into other things?
Quite a bit. The most recent of something that's in our vested interest is like The Matrix used a lot of references to Alice in Wonderland, offering the red and blue pill, and it's like one of them says, shows you how far the rabbit hole goes. There was also the follow the white rabbit analogy in the first Matrix. So yeah, it definitely still shows up, and I dare say that probably more responsibility goes to that for the movie, because movies are our chosen outlet. Because I think in America, sadly, I mean, whether or not this is a commentary or anything, it's like, yeah, Americans don't read very much.
That's true. We don't generally tend to read, or more specifically, what we do read tends to be short news articles, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's obviously an industry devoted to books, but yeah, I know I don't read as much as I used to, and I don't read as much as I sometimes want to, but I have tons of books on my shelf, and like I said, I quote, there's actually another interesting idea for a podcast that might take some more time is, the reviewing books on my shelf, which, interestingly enough, in the intro, we talk about movies, but it just says we'll review it, our shelves. So we could actually talk about a book one day or something like that.
We could. I mean, I thought we toyed the idea of books that are related to movies, but we'll get there.
Yep.
So, but I was gonna say though, it's like again, movies being our chosen outlet and where we learn a lot of things, and this being Disney, being the vast empire that it is, and again, it would not be surprising if a lot of references came directly from this movie, if anywhere else.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is a cultural, I don't say icon, but as much as the live action movie existed recently, it wouldn't exist if it weren't for this telling of Alice in Wonderland, or at least I don't think it would. And since this has been around since the 50s, and at the time was not well received critically, the fact that we're still talking about it 67 years later must mean it made some sort of an impression. Now, Disney does do one thing incredibly well, and that is marketing. And they have been known to create artificial vacuums to create a demand to get their VHS, their DVD, and their Blu-ray back out into the world. But here we are still talking about this. This is near, I think, I don't want to say the end, but if you want to draw a period from Disney's first animated film to the period of time where it sort of diverged and it wasn't as popular as it once was, it wasn't as well received. Look at the 70s. There were plenty of Disney animated movies coming out, and they almost killed their own industry until the Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, until that era provided some resurgence for their animated film arm.
Yeah, I believe it was a Little Mermaid that brought it back. It was the first of the rebirth, the renaissance of the Disney animated.
Yes, but if you look, this one kind of was near the end of that sort of 15, 20-year span of good, solid animation. And then they were quietly producing things, not as quietly as Disney ever does anything, but they were not as well received publicly.
Yeah, I gotta say, when you speak of that, of the changing era, I guess of no other better way to describe it, is that this is probably the last one, at least to me, I could be wrong, but there was a period in Disney where they really heavily recycled their animation. And you could probably find this on YouTube of videos of I don't know what the keywords of Disney recycling animation, Disney reusing animation, everything, but you'll see where the animation in The Jungle Book looks identical to the animation in Robin Hood, and you can see that in several movies of that era. My point being is that Alice in Wonderland doesn't really have any of that recycled animation. So yes, I do think that you are correct in saying that this is a mile marker and probably marking the end of when Disney rode as high as it did from the beginning and start of its low point till its resurgence back since the Little Mermaid.
Yeah, I could be a little off on the years when I say the years at the end of that, because you mentioned Robin Hood and The Jungle Book, and those were standouts, but I think they were the exception rather than the rule for most of the 60s and the 70s. And the 80s.
Well, I don't know if those were the, because I said another one you can bring up were the recycled animation. The Aristocats.
So let me ask you this. The Aristocats was a fine animated movie, but what it didn't have, and something that Disney has in recent decades come to market almost exclusively, is princesses. It didn't have a hook. It was just a feature-length animated movie. The Jungle Book was good. Robin Hood was fun. There were some fun songs in there. But when Disney experienced its renaissance, it went back to Snow White and Sleeping Beauty and, the movies that started it and said, oh, hey, by the way, they're princesses. So some of their other animation gets pushed by the wayside because of the Disney marketing machine.
Yeah, I think that probably then is, you could say that they saw something that worked way back when and decided let's just go back with that, and hey, new technologies, now we don't have to recycle animation to make the cartoons look good.
Yeah, because I tell you, one of the things that I noticed on this rewatch was the animation for the 50s, for 1951, was absolutely fantastic. And it stands up. It's not something that you can look at and go, oh yeah, you can tell that was the 50s. There are a few things here and there where you're like, oh yeah, they've gotten much better about doing that now, but it's really good animation.
Yeah, I gotta say that for the longest time, I didn't exactly know when this movie came out. I just kind of accepted it as a Disney cartoon from my childhood and never really looked into it until until I actually started really getting into collecting movies and looking at it. It's like, wow, this is 1951?
Yeah, I honestly didn't realize it was that early. I thought it was the late 50s, maybe even into the early 60s. So I don't keep track of the dates most movies come out that were before I was aware of when movies came out. I do remember going to see this at the theater, and I think I've mentioned this before in previous podcasts. My theater in my hometown had a weekend summer film festival thing for kids where on Saturday afternoons or Tuesday afternoon or whatever, it was the summertime, you could go down there with a can of food for the food bank and get in to see, a kids movie. So I know I saw a lot of Disney related stuff like the Apple Dumpling Gang and most of Disney's animation on the big screen while providing food for those less fortunate. And for a couple of cans of corn, you could see all kinds of movies.
I never saw this movie in the theater, to tell you the truth. It was not one of the ones that got re-released during my childhood in the late 70s and the early 80s. I mean, I remember my mom taking me to see Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. This one I never saw a re-release in theaters during my childhood. I didn't see it unless it was on the version of cable television back then, which was Select TV. I don't know if anybody remembers that.
I don't.
It was a precursor to cable.
Okay.
You rented a box, they put a special antenna on your roof, and you turned it to channel 3, switched it on, and you watched movies.
Yeah, well, there we go then.
And when that went away, I didn't see it until I bought it on DVD, which is funny. You didn't ask how this ended up on my shelf.
Oh, yeah, we did skip that part, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
We suck at this.
Yeah, well, it's 21. We were drinking too much. This, I dare say, was probably the first Disney DVD that I ever bought. Roughly bought it about the time when I started collecting movies. And again, it wasn't in my head that I was going to start a Disney collection or anything. I just said, you know what, of all the Disney movies, I thought this one was the most interesting. This is also when I was starting to develop my weird phase, where I was like a one-man counterculture. You make a face as if you kind of were part of that.
I was trying to come up with a way to say, so that phase never really ended.
No, but... I thought this one most appropriate and everything. And yeah, from there, it's like the only other Disney DVD that I ever bought was The Lion King, because I really enjoyed that movie. I got some big edition on that one. But then when they started coming out in Blu-ray, then I said, okay, I'm going to get a whole Disney collection going. So I have this movie in 2 editions because I couldn't bring myself to sell the DVD version. Because there's really not much difference between the Blu-ray and the DVD. Maybe a couple little details here and there.
Now, I looked online and I didn't see any differences. We have the DVD, and when I looked at the Blu-ray, I said, there's nothing different. I'm not going to...
Oh, no. Like you said, though, it's like Disney is a master of marketing. So the 2-disc DVD set is called the Masterpiece Edition.
Yes.
Yeah, the Blu-ray is called the 60th Anniversary Edition.
Oh, yeah. Disney will market the hell out of everything.
Yeah, I like how you said they'll create a vacuum, and it's like, yeah, well, hey, you don't have the 60th Anniversary Edition, do you? I'm like, no, I do not.
well, you're absolutely right. I certainly don't. That makes me feel bad. So, yeah, how this got on my shelf is fundamentally the same way. It was not necessarily the first one that we bought, but more specifically, Christy is a big fan of Disney, and I, at one point in my life, had a collection of Disney VHS that were stolen from my car. Very sad. But I have since replaced them with DVDs, and I did have Alice in Wonderland on VHS, and I've always enjoyed this as a diversionary cartoon. If it's on when I'm flipping the channels, I'll, stop and kind of watch, again, because of the cultural influences, the grinning like a Cheshire cat and all those sort of things. And it's just something I kind of had to own. But in the interest of full disclosure, I have not read the Lewis Carroll books. Have you?
I read Alice in Wonderland a long time ago. It is going to make you laugh. It was a version that they were giving away with Happy Meals at McDonald's.
Awesome.
They were giving away American classics on these tiny little books. And it was probably a very heavily abridged version now that I think about it. But
I'm sure.
Because there was Tom Sawyer, there was Alice in Wonderland, there were a couple other American classics or whatever. I'm sure if you had them, they'd be kind of valuable right now. But
yeah, who keeps that kind of stuff?
I wish I did, because now looking back, and I'm like, yeah, those are just interesting little things, And just imagine, not giving away some Barbie doll or Hot Wheels cars, but giving away books with a Happy Meal. Go
That's
figure
crazy.
that out.
Stop it. That's one of the things, I don't know, you guys have them out in L.A., or at least in California. I've seen them. Chick-fil-A Are you familiar with that restaurant?
Yes, I am familiar with that restaurant.
Okay, well, anyway, in Virginia or in the South in general, they are very popular. But their kids' meals have educational types of toys as opposed to a Hot Wheel or a Barbie doll or whatever. So I respect that about their business model. They're not just out there trying to shill toys to the kids. We can leave anything else you want to say about Chick-fil-A on the back burner. We'll talk about that later.
Cool.
So there's that.
There's that. So no easy way to segue then from there.
Yeah. Hold on.
Tap.
All right.
Tap. So, the thing I'd like to talk about, though, is the cast of this particular animated feature. There's some interesting things about them that, I was kind of hoping that we'd talk about.
Yeah, actually, I did want to talk about the voice talent, and I had seen a documentary, like a Disney history of kind of thing, that spoke about the young girl that was used as the model for Alice was the girl that did the voice because they were so impressed by her that they wanted to use her to draw Alice in the movie. So I did know that, and I saw it while I was doing the research for this.
You're speaking of Catherine Beaumont.
Yes, but she was 10 years old when she did this, and she also did the voice of Wendy Darling in Peter Pan. But she kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, about people who quit their acting careers and go do other things. She was a teacher in Southern California for nigh on 40 years until about 1999, when she reprised the voice of Alice in a couple of video games. If you're familiar with Kingdom Hearts.
I am familiar with them. Never played them, but I'm really familiar with the popularity.
Yeah, she did some voice work for video games and a couple of episodes of, I think, House of Mouse or something like that, some Disney stuff. But she reprised the voice, like I said, 40 years later.
That's pretty awesome. And to think, it's like when somebody who's that famous, who's that close and that accessible, I could have just gone and said hello.
I'm sure she would have appreciated that.
I'm sure she would. If you're listening there, Miss Beaumont.
Hello.
Hello. Because she seems like the kind of person who might want to click. See Alice in Wonderland. Oh, I wonder what they're saying about my movie. Click.
Yeah. I find that interesting because, again, it goes back to whatever happened to the fact that she wanted to be a teacher. I'm sure she could have done anything. She probably could have used this to springboard into other voice work, at least, or into live action acting or something like that. But she chose to finish her education and go become a teacher. And I can't tell you how much respect I have for teachers in the first place, that they give back to the community, that they teach our children. Say what you want. I think teachers should get paid far more than they do. And I completely respect the fact that she gave up potentially, at the very least, fame, if not far more money than she made as a teacher, to educate kids. And I'm sure she probably had some good voices with which to entertain the children.
That, I think, would have been interesting. I think it's like, can you imagine having a kid saying, yeah, my kid learned from Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, absolutely.
Somebody else I also want to mention is Mr. Sterling Holloway. Again, you probably don't know the name, but I think more people would recognize his voice if they knew that he's generally the voice of Winnie the Pooh. And in Alice in Wonderland, he was the voice of the Cheshire Cat. He was Kaa in The Jungle Book. His resume is quite extensive. IMDb puts him at about 179 credits.
And he has a very distinct voice.
Oh, yeah.
He's one of those people you're like, oh, that's that voice. I recognize that voice.
Yeah, I know that voice or anything. I've heard him before. Yes, you have. And like I said, I think everybody who subsequently does Winnie the Pooh tries to emulate him.
Yes, and it's never quite the same.
No.
It's ingrained in our minds that this is the voice.
His version of the Cheshire Cat is definitely one of which I use as a benchmark to judge all other renditions of the Cheshire Cat. And it's from there that's, either it's better or just as good or not as good, but it's always based on that foundation of this man's voice.
I agree 100%.
I think, it's like, one thing to say about Alice in Wonderland, it's definitely one of those stories that has been redone many times over. If you just put in the search engine of IMDb, Alice in Wonderland, you will find quite an extensive list of versions of Alice in Wonderland. I mean, you really have to specify that you're looking for the Disney one. And Some imagery I like, and it's like, yeah, there's a video game called American McGee's Alice.
I'm not familiar with that.
It's based on the artwork by our American McGee, and he does a very dark rendition of the Wonderland mythos. And I actually have his version of the Cheshire Cat tattooed on my leg.
Oh, okay.
His version, it's got a huge grin, but he's kind of, I don't want to say demonic, but very emaciated, sinister looking creature. And the image is great. I love it until I played the game and heard him talk. It's like, oh,
never mind.
I'm not saying it was bad, but I'm just saying, again, to use Holloway's Cheshire Cat as a benchmark, you could have done better. Still love the imagery. Like I said, I have the image tattooed on me. It's part of me now and everything. But yeah, as long as I don't hear him talk too much. On its own, it's a good voice. Don't get me wrong. They did a good job. I love the game. I love the sequel. Both of them are on PlayStation.
Are they PlayStation exclusive?
That is a good question. I don't think so.
For our listeners, Dan is a PlayStation kind of guy, and I'm an Xbox kind of guy. So we have our differences.
It is a multi-platform game, so you can find it on Xbox if you so choose. It takes a little bit of searching through Amazon, but
okay.
Yeah, you can find it on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. Huh. Yeah, like I said, it's a darker rendition of the Wonderland mythos. It's kind of a sequel type of thing where she returns. Alice has spent some time in an insane asylum because of her adventures, quote unquote, in Wonderland.
Oh, well.
Yeah. It's like things took a real bad turn when she got back from Wonderland for her. So if you don't want the innocence of the Disney movie to be ruined, I don't suggest you play this game.
Okay, then. Yeah, when she woke up from her nap, it wasn't... They do know it was just a nap, right? I mean, it was a dream.
Was it?
Well, that's what we're led to believe at the end of the film when her sister wakes her up and says, Alice, Alice. But we got into this video game because the gentleman that did the voice of the Cheshire Cat did some voice acting in that as well.
No. I was just using the comparison of the Cheshire Cats. Like I said, it's...
okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's like he had the Alice game... The Cheshire Cat, image-wise, fantastic. But then when I first heard him talk, it was like, oh, not quite the same.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of voice act. You see the Cheshire Cat in some things, you're like, oh, yeah, that's not the same.
Yeah, I think a better example of the disappointment, and again, I don't mean to say that it was bad, is the live-action version that Disney released most recently, where Stephen Fry was the voice of the Cheshire Cat. And again, by itself, if I didn't know about Sterling Holloway's performance, I would have said, yeah, this is a pretty good, I enjoy quoting the Cheshire Cat from the new movie. But Stephen Fry is not Sterling Holloway. And when I compare the two, it's greatly disappointing. By himself, he's fantastic.
Yeah, Sterling Holloway has a very distinct voice, and he lended his voice talents to a lot of other things. I mean, he was acting for quite some time, up until 1986.
Yeah, apparently he did some TV appearances, too.
Yeah, he was in the old Superman television series. He was Lambert, the Sheepish Lion, if you remember that. I know, I think it was a Disney short, but he was pretty busy. I mean, he made a great career with his voice, which is awesome. Actually, he was the stork in Lambert, the Sheepish Lion. He wasn't really Lambert, but still, you can pick out his voice in the things that you watch and go, oh, hey, that's the guy that did the voice of the Cheshire Cat. And the same thing goes with the guy that did the voice of the White Rabbit. He did some voice work as Droopy Dog, if you recall Droopy from Hello, folks. My name's Droopy.
I think this is funny when we were talking about this. This is the mile marker when Disney declined. It's when they stopped reusing voice actors and started reusing animation.
I think, again, going back to something that we'd said before, Disney has an ability, or they revived that ability or refound that ability to capture the right voice for the role. I'm sure that there are other people that could do it just fine, but those voices become so iconic that you can't see anyone else ever doing it. Like Robin Williams as the genie in Aladdin. I think they had some other people in mind, but I could never get into the follow-on sequel where Robin Williams wasn't doing the voice. You're like, no, that's not that. Never mind. So I love what Disney does with their voice talents, or with capturing their voice talents. And one of the things that I did take down in my notes while I was watching this movie, and it kind of goes to this era of Disney. If you think about Snow White and Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty and those movies before that, with a few exceptions, there weren't many voices that were exceptionally distinct in the way that there are in Alice in Wonderland. Cinderella, you had the mice, Gus Gus and all that kind of stuff, but Cinderella had a regular voice. Snow White had a regular voice. Maleficent had a regular voice. But when you get to Alice in Wonderland, when you got the Cheshire Cat and the White Rabbit and the Mad Hatter and the March Hare and the Queen of Hearts and the King of Hearts, they all had specific voices that could not have been done with just you or I. It had to be a character voice, and it had to be someone with a distinct voice that could slip into that. I mean, maybe Mel Blanc could have done it, but I'm not sure that he was interested in working with Disney that much. Was he even alive then? He must have been. Yeah, he was, because he was busy doing. Yeah, he was busy doing.
He was Bugs Bunny.
Yeah, I was going to say he was busy doing Bugs Bunny and everything related. But I think Mel Blanc was an exception rather than the rule. And anything you ever see Sterling Holloway in, he's always kind of got that same voice, and it's the same bass with a little difference as opposed to just going and doing a different voice.
That's the thing though. It's like you gotta really talk about the whole formula though, because it's not just the voice. I mean, I can do the voice, but
really?
there's some. Well, if I try, I'm not gonna do it now. But there's something else. I mean, because Winnie the Pooh has a personality. Winnie the Pooh isn't just the voice. When he says "oh bother" or whatever, it's like you just can't just say it. I mean, it's like he puts life into it, and it's like the same thing with Bugs Bunny with Mel Blanc. It's like a lot of people imitate it, but they don't put the same life into it. It's like it's the whole formula.
I agree wholeheartedly. There have been some great imitations, but unless you're really, really good, you could never truly recreate. All you can do is be a pale imitation of. One of the things that I also kind of wanted to touch on was some of the things that were in this movie that I don't necessarily know that Disney would include in the first place or necessarily get away with including, such as the use of matches, the just let's light a fire when Alice was growing inside of the White Rabbit's house. When the White Rabbit went to go seek aid, it was like, oh, we'll burn her out. Let's just light it on fire. That'll be great. Do you have a match? Let's light this on fire. It'll be fantastic. The walrus in the bit about the walrus and the carpenter, looking for a match to light his stogie, and I think he ended up lighting that off of an oyster, if I recall correctly.
I think so. I know the scene you're talking about and everything, but
yeah, we just watched this recently, and now suddenly we're forgetting.
No, but it's that scene actually still gives me nightmares. Because I don't know if you remember, being eaten alive was like, I talked about when I talked about horror movies, one of my biggest fears is that being swallowed alive and everything. And here's this cartoon, like all these cute little baby oysters, who trust this man. And it's like the next thing you know, he's like he ate them all whole, and they're all languishing in his belly, and they're getting slowly digested. And it's like, why would they put this in a Disney movie?
Well, it was a different time, so.
And you're worried about the cigar and matches. Look at you.
No, I'm merely pointing this out as it was a different time. That's kind of one of the things I wanted to point out was it goes back to the images that we had in the 50s of what life should be like. We were just coming out of World War II. And in fact, the length of time that it takes to make an animated movie, this movie had to have been started in 47, 48, something like that. It took a few years to animate a movie. So, it goes back to what we were looking at in the 40s, really, in the late 40s, about what we could or couldn't do or show or not show to children, to impressionable children at that, and think that it was okay to get away with. The flip side of this is this was also marketed to adults in the same way that Disney movies tend to be. You can show some of the more adult things and then ideally, have the adults interact with the kids and say, hey, we don't play with matches. But it does, again, going to my point, speak to a different time, and I don't know that Disney would do the same thing in the same way nowadays.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you look at Disney films, and I think what has happened is that their adult characteristics have gone from, for lack of a better term, forgive me, from being blatant, the matches, the cigar, the acts of arson, and they've gotten a lot more subtle. And you can see that, a movie we reviewed, The Incredibles, there was a little bit of sexual innuendo there.
A little
You
bit?
know,
No, there was
a
some
little.
straight up blatant sexual innuendo
Okay.
when Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl getting busy.
Okay, yeah, that one was it. But I was talking about the scene in the beginning of the movie when she's like, it's like, oh, you need to be more flexible. And it's like, wow. And it's like you could just imagine the relationship that they had before kids. You get my point. It's not a matter of what Disney would or would not do. It's a matter of how they would do it. And my point is, like, they wouldn't be so blatant in your face with it. They're a lot more subtle.
Yes, there would be a lot more subtlety.
Subtlety.
Yes, subtlety.
Yeah, that's a word that you would definitely hear at the Mad Tea Party.
Ooh, happy unbirthday to you.
It's funny you talk about cultural impact and everything. It's like, for me personally, I almost, not quite, but almost exclusively drink the Alice in Wonderland tea that I buy from Disneyland. Because, it's like, I think I've mentioned before, we're annual pass holders, so we go there often, and when I run out of tea, we go buy more tea from them.
You can't get that online? I think you can get that from the internet.
You probably could, but it's more fun buying it from Disneyland.
Marketing.
And,
Got it. Okay.
yeah, marketing. And one of these days, I will buy the teapot set that they have, which is pretty freaking awesome. But right for now, I have it's a teacup that looks like 3 cups haphazardly stacked together, but it's actually just 1 cup. It's really neat looking.
Sweet.
So there's that. I occasionally wear a top hat. Just to...
Is that out of tribute to the Mad Hatter?
Partially. I got to say that he had no influence there is to be disingenuous.
Disingenuous?
Yeah, that too.
Okay, just checking.
This is Alice in Wonderland. We don't need to use proper words.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, we could actually make stuff up. But one of the other things, I like the Tea Party thing, it's interesting that has endured culturally, and I think that goes to what Walt Disney had in mind when he created Disneyland, was that you could escape. You could do what it is that we do when we watch movies. We have a bit of escapism from real life. And I think that's what most of the Disney animation, and this one in particular, Alice in Wonderland, captures, is that daydreaming sense of childhood, living fancy-free, but there's also the idea that you do have to come back to reality. Again, I don't know if I'm missing the point of the movie. It's entirely possible, I suppose. I think there are some other hidden messages that are in your face but subtle, about classism and about sometimes you just have to do things just because it's fun and not because anyone said you have to do it. I mean, about enjoying life a bit. Going back to the classism, there's the part about the dandelions and the tiger lilies when she comes upon the flowers, and I think it's the tiger lily. I'm not absolutely certain. But is just looking down her nose at Alice going, oh, she's nothing more than a common weed.
Oh, wasn't it the rose?
Was it the rose? I don't remember. Again, just watched the movie recently. Still can't remember every single thing because I was focused on the idea and not who is saying it. But it does speak to classism, and it does speak to how people will react to that. Like, hey, I'm not just a weed. I'm a flower in my own right. Is it just me?
No, I think you probably will find that other people see that as well. Now that you've mentioned it, I don't think I can unsee it. Next time I go to Disneyland, and I have to say, the Alice in Wonderland ride is probably 3rd favorite ride.
Okay. I actually, when I go to Disneyland or Disney World, the Magic Kingdom, I enjoy It's a Small World, and that is because when I was a kid, I had one of those 45s with the read-along book, and Tinkerbell's bell would tell you when to turn the page. And for some reason, It's a Small World was one of my favorites. So as annoying as that song is to hear over and over and over again, I always go on that ride when I go to the Magic Kingdom.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny. We took my 2-year-old daughter on there. The first time we took her on there, we thought, okay, let's make sure this doesn't scare her too much. But she enjoyed it. She loved it. But there's a part where the little car that you're riding goes outside.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes down a ramp to bring you back down to ground level. She cried at that part.
Maybe because she didn't want to go back to reality?
Yeah, possibly. But no, she loves it. She loves the colors. She loves, she held on with both hands on the hand railing and just looks in awe.
Cool. And it is fun to see that through your children's eyes. I know that's one of the things kind of, again, going down the rabbit hole of Disneyland and Disney World and all that kind of stuff. The trips that I have made to those theme parks with my kids have been more interesting than the ones I went when I was a kid and when I was an adult, because I got to watch their faces light up, and I got to see them enjoying Mickey Mouse, a 6-foot rat. To borrow Robin Williams's reference, without the expletive. But that's one of the things that I enjoy about these movies, especially when we got them, was that my kids were younger, and it was part of the growing up process, and hopefully they will show the Disney animated movies to their kids, if they have any. I mean, it's their choice. But this will continue on, and the Disney animation will not be lost, because I think this is a generational thing. We all have our Disney movies from our generation, but by the same token, we still watch Snow White, and we still watch Cinderella, and those movies are 80 years old. But I tell you what I would be really interested in hearing.
What's that?
Is what our listeners think. If they have a favorite Disney movie. And if they have a favorite Disney ride.
Yeah, that would make for some interesting conversation.
Yep. So, and one of the last things that I kind of wanted to cover is, unlike many Disney movies for decades, there were no particular songs in this movie that stuck out to me. I know there were some songs in there, but there was nothing that I could pinpoint and say, oh yeah, I sing this absent-mindedly every now and again, unlike many other Disney movies.
Yeah, I think this is that's one of the other aspects that makes this unique among Disney movies, is I don't think any music in there was meant to be part of the pop culture. It was just a formula for the movie. An element, I should say, not formula, but an element of the movie, not necessarily meant to take on a life of its own. Not like what you see nowadays, where Beauty and the Beast and Under the Sea and all these other songs.
Yeah, I just asked my wife if she wanted to build a snowman earlier because there was a picture of a snowman on her phone. And I sang it to her because you can't just ask that anymore. Do you want to build a snowman?
And that's the thing, it's like, it kind of makes you wonder, is like, was Frozen really made to market the music, or was the music made to make the movie better?
Yes.
Exactly. You don't have that with Alice in Wonderland. I think the music was just part of the whole formula.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that Disney wasn't quite into as much yet. There were songs in the previous animated movies, and then you went for a while. I mean, The Jungle Book had the bare necessities and a few things like that. But I don't know that Disney had made that massive marketing distinction between, wait a minute, wait. We can sell the soundtrack too. And if we get someone else to do a reprisal of the song as a song, like in Aladdin, and when I say song, I mean, like a radio release or whatnot, like Aladdin had a whole new world, had the voice actors, and then they had a different duet singing the song as the closing credits were going out.
Yeah, the flavor of the month pop star singing it.
Sure, yeah.
No, but though, I gotta say though, I don't fully agree, because if you look even further back than that, when you look at Pinocchio, When You Wish Upon a Star, that became the Disney anthem. That was a memorable song. Now, again, whether or not they meant it to be memorable, it's a memorable song. I'm Wishing from Snow White, Once Upon a Dream, I think it was, from Sleeping Beauty. I mean, maybe they were the pop stars of their time singing it, and yeah, but looking back, maybe we don't see them as being as famous.
Again, not living in the era, it's hard to know, because again, radio was still the dominant means of transmitting information in that day and age.
Yeah, we didn't quite have television, But I dare say that, I mean, even those movies had memorable songs.
No, absolutely, and I'm not disagreeing with you at all. What I'm saying is, I think that in the recent past, they have decided they can market them both distinctly, as opposed to the original movies, Snow White, as you had mentioned, and Cinderella. Those were incorporated in the movie, and yes, they were popular, but I don't necessarily know, like you said, that was the original intent.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they were marketed nearly as much because, quite frankly, there was nothing to market them over. It's not like you could show them on television over and over and over again. You had to go to the theater to see this. And then on radio, you had, whatever radio dramas were showing, and you only had so many channels and only so many people had it. It wasn't as prolific as television is now. It wasn't like the internet. sweet mother of mercy, we could download tons and tons and tons of crap right now just because somebody created it on a whim. I mean, that's part of how we got to do this podcast, is because somewhere on the internet a place exists where we can upload this and people can download it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's taking advantage of the technology that exists in your day and age.
So yeah, it's like, you know, Disney acting based on the available technology, I think. But you know, there's something else I wanted to mention too. You know, you're saying something unique about this movie is that not only the song not as memorable, which again it's not entirely a bad. This also has like the main female protagonist who's not a princess. I mean, you mentioned earlier the Aristocats didn't have princesses, but you know they were well-to-do, wealthy cats.
Mm-hmm.
So, as close as cats can get to being royalty, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, I mean, as far as human characters, Alice is not a Disney princess. She might be well-to-do for her time, but not royalty.
She is not, and I think that's one of the things that keeps her from being a part of the significant marketing of the Disney princesses, but by the same token, it gives those young girls who want to be independent and not wrapped up in the princess. Oh, I'm a princess. Like, no, I'm me. I'm going to be Alice.
Alice. Which brings up two thoughts here. One of them kind of comical, and the one of them that might be a little uncomfortable, so forewarning here.
Uncomfortable for whom?
Well, you'll see.
Okay.
But, you know, first up, it's like, do you think the characters at Disneyland and, you know, / Disney World, do you think they pick on the ones that are Alice, you know, because like, oh, we're princesses and you're nothing. You know, it's like...
Well, I would hope not. I mean, come on. Yeah. Disney's a lot better than that, I would like to think, in my mind.
You know, I've read books, man. It's like, you know, with the behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's some vicious stuff there too.
Yeah, you want to hear some crazy stories? Read Mouse Tales and Mouse Tales 2, or more Mouse Tales.
Okay.
Yeah, behind the scenes of people who worked at Disneyland and tell all kinds of nefarious stories. Some of them comical, some of them like, whoa. You know,
Ooh.
Yeah, if you're into Disney and don't mind that there's some dark sides and some shadows behind the scenes, then by all means read those books. And that's why I kind of believe that people who play Alice is like, these bitches, they think they're just so hot because they're princesses, you know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But the other thing that brings up the uniqueness and everything, well, maybe not talking about how unique it is not the proper or everything, but Alice in Wonderland definitely has had many versions. And there is a trend, I don't know if it's a recent trend, but there's a trend of adultifying Disney characters.
Okay.
Making them very risque. And, you know, Disney princess specifically, making them look like pinups or very sexy. Basically sexualizing Disney characters.
I'm familiar with that.
You know, and so my thing is, though, one of the things I see, because, you know, I look on art sites, DeviantArt, I'm sure if you heard that site, you see some examples of this. It's a website where independent artists can show off their work, and a lot of times... Cool. They take things into the dark side of fantasy and everything, and but one of the common comment threats I see when it comes to this treatment of Alice in Wonderland is that people really ought not do it, because in the Disney version she's what, 10?
10? Yeah, she was 10 when she made this movie, so, or the voice actress Kathy Beaumont. So I assume she's 10-ish.
I mean, you know, it's like part of me is like, hey man, you know, artist expression, but at the same time it's like, is that wrong?
I'm gonna say yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if you say that this is Alice grown up and go that away, then I guess there's room for it, but that is kind of creepy.
A lot of artists have said that, you know. I mean, like I said, for me, I mean, I like the dark fantasy versions where, you know, the Vorpal blade is this big butcher knife and everything that was a la American McGee, and, you know, the Cheshire Cat's this demonic looking cat. No, it's like, I get that, everything. And yeah, when somebody does a Disney character in pinup style, or that, you know, Belle is in this beast. She's got the beast on a leash, and she's in this S&M style
sort of.
Yeah, the S&M style get up and everything, but it's yellow like her ballroom dress. You know, it's like,
well, okay,
I get that. That's fun and titillating, you know. But yeah, sometimes I gotta question myself when I see the Alice in Wonderland entry, and it's like,
Yeah, but all the Disney princesses are at the oldest 18, and that's Cinderella. No, because that was her, not Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, rather, because that was her 16th birthday.
Yeah, I was about to say Ariel is 16.
So they're all 16 and, you know, 10 to 16 in the case of Alice, but all the princesses are 15, 16-ish. So if you want to talk about the sexualization of teenage girls, which kind of actually goes back to our listener response conversation a little bit, is the sexualization and objectification of women in general. Then this deviant art is functionally doing the same thing.
And in the vein, I would say yes, but luckily we live in a time where now that they are also doing it to a lot of the male characters. So I do see some equality. At least it's a start.
But they're still minors.
Yeah, but they don't draw them as minors. They draw them as older.
And again, that goes to the aging them up piece. So
Yeah.
That's the piece that you have to, I think, make it a point to state clearly that this is 18 plus Belle, or this is 18 plus Ariel, or this is 18 plus Aladdin, or whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah. Of course, just kind of, again, a touch of tangent subject, everything. The one thing I do like also I've seen is a growing trend of gender swapping Disney characters.
I've seen that too. It's kind of an interesting concept.
Quite. That's my 2 cents I put on that subject.
Okay. Yeah, that pretty much wraps up everything I wanted to say about the movie. Was there anything that you wanted to add?
No, I mean, it's like I said, this and Lion King are probably the only Disney movies that I own. My mistake. This, The Lion King, and Lilo and Stitch. The only movies I own multi-format.
Okay.
Other than that, I mean, like I said, it doesn't, I know the next question coming up is, like, where does it belong on my shelf? And, the short answer of that is among the other Disney movies, because like I said, I've said before that Disney movies / Pixar movies all occupy one shelf separate from the rest. So they Disney neighborhood, so to say, on my shelf. But it does have a little bit of special place in my heart just because it is the Lewis Carroll story that is just so odd and out there that, the kind of thing that I like to emulate.
Okay. For me, this is a perfectly serviceable Disney animation from an animated movie standpoint. It's better than a significant amount of animation. When you put it in the category of Disney, the animation is good, but the overall feel that you get from a Disney movie isn't necessarily there. So I would put this probably middle of my second shelf, slightly towards the rear of that. It's a great movie. I think, like I said, most of the there's a lot of Disney animation that would be in front of it. And I'm sure we'll get to that because I own lots of Disney animation, as do you, as you have mentioned a number of times. So at some point we'll cover all of that. But yeah, no, it's above general population, but just slightly edging out of GP. So let's click the random magic movie button and find out what our next movie is.
My Cousin Vinny.
Excellent.
All right, My Cousin Vinny. That sounds like fun. That is an oft-quoted movie, at least certain parts of it.
Yeah, if not for all the right reasons, but yeah, quoted often.
Well, there's that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things where people quote a movie and they have no idea why they're quoting. They just think it sounds funny. Or they think it has no context or anything. But okay, it's quoted.
True. I've done it myself, so it's all good. Again, depending on the context. All right, so as a reminder to our listeners, you can contact us on the, as mentioned, Facebook page. You can email us at wrios2016mr@gmail.com. You can leave feedback on our Podbean page. You can go to iTunes and rank us. I think about 38.7% of our downloads have been on iTunes. So if there are that many downloads, then please go to the podcast page on iTunes and leave us 5 stars, preferably. If not, if you're going to give us 1 star, then please provide us with the feedback to tell us why you gave us 1 star so that we can make ourselves better. And if you want to discuss your favorite ride at Disneyland / World, how you feel about Alice in Wonderland, or any other topic that suits your fancy, if you want to see pictures of Dan's teacup, we might be able to convince him to post that on the Facebook page. And with that, I bid you adieu. Dan, would you care to lead us out with a carefully worded movie-themed goodbye?
All of this silly nonsense. This is the stupidest tea party I've ever been to in all my life.
I'm a little offended by your use of that particular quote. This is not the stupidest tea party I've ever been to. but well played. I think it's the first time Dan's done a voice on the podcast, so we will appreciate it for what it is. And when I say the first time you've done a voice, I mean you have done some distinct voices for the goodbye, but First time you've tried to imitate an animated character. So, all right, we will see you in 2 weeks with my cousin Vinny.